Welcome back to the channel of History at War, where we dive deep and uncover the world of World War II. During the end of the Second World War, the German army group known as Fortress Courland found themselves in a pocket with the Baltic Sea behind them. They were greatly outnumbered by the Soviet forces and had to fight in 6 major battles from October 1944 until the end of the war in Europe. In 1944, Colonel General Ferdinand Schörner's Army Group North was trapped in Latvia's Courland Peninsula with a 160 kilometers front. The Red Army had taken over the Baltic states, and Schörner knew time was running out. He gathered 3 powerful panzer divisions to attack the Russian lines, with the goal of reaching Memel, where thousands of civilians were still left there, and then eventually East Prussia to link up with the Army Group Center. The 4th, 12th, and 14th Panzer Divisions were set to lead Operation Geier to break out of Courland on October 17, 1944. However, Marshal Govorov and his Soviet forces beat them to it and launched an attack, starting a series of epic battles for Fortress Courland. The Germans managed to hold off the Soviets on their left flank, but the 1st Baltic Front attacked the 18th Army. The Germans were able to hold their ground, and the Soviet attack stopped after 5 days. The first battle for Courland ended with minimal Soviet gains, but their victory stopped the Germans' Operation Geier. The Germans were now trapped, and their only escape was by sea. Schörner's army was trapped just like the 6th Army was in Stalingrad. This was officially called the Courland bridgehead, but any mention of a pocket was met with severe punishment. Hitler ordered that the area be held at all costs, but the Germans were outnumbered by much more manpower and armor and faced Govorov's overwhelming forces. Soviet bombers attacked the important harbor at Liepāja, destroying ships and supplies. Despite German attempts to improve their position, Soviet resistance grew stronger, and the Soviets repelled every attack the Germans tried. On October 27th, the Soviet army launched an offensive against German positions in Courland. They used 2,000 guns and 60 divisions to storm the area, supported by 400 tanks. The German lines quickly broke when the Soviet army attacked with tanks. A radio message reported, "The enemy attacked on a wide front. We are holding," when a radio report from the 1-215 Fusilier Battalion. "The enemy is attacking with 20 tanks." The message was interrupted. It was the last that was heard from the company. The Soviet armor pushed through the 30th Infantry Division, despite some temporary success by the Germans. To stop the gap, Schörner sent the 4th Panzer Division back into battle. The German lines were quickly overwhelmed, but counterattacks temporarily pushed back the Soviet armor. Sergeant First Class Hermann Bix, a tank commander, played a key role in the fighting, rescuing 2 Panthers stuck in a wooded ravine and driving off Soviet infantry. Bix's Panthers later faced a group of T-34S and Joseph Stalin JS-2 tanks, which they destroyed. Tank battles raged throughout the front, with both sides inflicting heavy losses. On October 29th, the Soviet Air Force strafed German units caught on roads, but Major Erich Rudorfer's Focke-Wulf's 190 SS managed to shoot down 11 bombers. The 4th Panzer Division defended the Latila Hills, with Sergeant First Class Bix distinguishing himself by destroying many enemy tanks despite his own being heavily damaged. The Soviet attacks slowed down in November, with both sides taking time to regroup and restock supplies. The Germans suffered losses while fighting Latvian partisans and Soviet irregulars posing as freedom fighters. The battle resumed on November 19th, with intense fighting and brutal conditions, but both sides fought to a standstill by the end of the month. Although the Soviet progress was less than expected, they still inflicted significant casualties on the Germans and pushed them closer to the Baltic Sea. In mid-December, the 3rd battle for Courland began with 170,000 Soviet shells raining down on a 22-mile front, causing destruction and chaos. 2nd Lieutenant Gottlob Biedermann witnessed the devastation and watched his friend die from a tank round. Fueled by rage, Biedermann grabbed a Panzerfaust and led an anti-tank unit to destroy 2 Soviet tanks. Biedermann took cover behind some broken branches when he saw a T-34 tank barrel approaching him from 60 feet away. He quickly grabbed a Panzerfaust, removed the safety pin, aimed at the red star on the tank, and fired. The projectile penetrated the turret and caused a fire and shrapnel explosion. 2 other soldiers with Biedermann destroyed another T-34, and the 3 of them were able to repel the Soviet infantry that came with the tanks by firing their carbines. The Soviets were attempting to capture Saldus and split the German armies apart, and despite heroic efforts from soldiers like Biedermann, the Germans were forced to pull back. The 205th Infantry Division collapsed, and the 227th Infantry Division and Grenadiers of the 12th Panzer Division were unable to stop the Soviets. The 912th Assault Gun Brigade eventually brought the Soviets to a halt, but German counterattacks failed due to heavy Soviet bombardment. The war was bitter, with Latvian SS soldiers fighting their own countrymen in the Red Army. Despite the hardships, the Germans scored another defensive victory in the Third Battle of Courland, but lost 27,000 men. Hitler refused to evacuate AGN from Courland, hoping to use it as a bridgehead for an attack on Leningrad. The Fourth Battle for Courland started with a Soviet artillery attack on January 24th, with the objective of capturing Liepāja and splitting the German 16th and 18th armies at Saldus. The 30th Infantry Division and the Nordland SS Division were forced to fall back fighting. The 14th Panzer Division, with the help of Tigers from the 510th Heavy PZ Battalion, managed to win back the old combat line, but were unable to keep it for long. The Soviets lost 40,000 men, 541 tanks, and 178 aircraft during the battle. Colonel General Heinrich von Vietinghoff replaced Rendulic as the commander of Army Group Courland and outlined a plan for evacuation by sea. However, Hitler refused to approve the withdrawal. The Soviet attacks continued, and on February 14th, Germany's fourth-ranking ace, Otto Kittel, was killed while engaging in a formation of Soviet Il-2s. On February 20th, in the Fifth Battle for Courland, the Soviets attacked with intense artillery and mortar fire and overpowered the German defenses near Pricule. The Germans made a stand on the hills near the Vartaya River and were able to stop the Soviet advance with the help of several divisions and brigades. The Soviet offensive was later shifted to the Saldus area, where the Germans were able to hold on until the spring thaw slowed the Soviet tanks and trucks. The Soviets suffered heavy losses in men, tanks, and aircraft, and temporarily gave up their offensive. During this time, the Germans reorganized and rebuilt their defenses, while enduring air raids and submarine attacks. Despite pleas from Donitz and Guderian to withdraw, Hitler refused, and the army group fought until they were almost out of ammunition and supplies. The troops were undernourished, and the horses were forced to pull carts over long distances, often carrying wounded soldiers. The end of the battle was near. The Sixth Battle for Courland began on March 18th, when the 10th Guard Army attacked the German defenders with a heavy artillery barrage, followed by tanks. The Germans fought back with the Prussian 11th Infantry Division and the 12th and 14th Panzer Divisions. Despite heavy losses on both sides, the Soviets eventually retreated on the 23rd. Guderian demanded the withdrawal of AGK, but Hitler refused, shouting, "Never!" The soldiers of AGK continued to fight despite the imminent collapse of the Third Reich. Over the 6 battles, the Germans inflicted 400,000 casualties on the Soviets and destroyed thousands of tanks and aircraft. The mission of Army Group Courland remained unchanged, and the morale of the troops remained strong. In May 1945, after the final battle in Berlin, most Soviet troops withdrew from Courland. On May 7th, General Hilpert called for a truce, and a few German soldiers were flown out of Courland, while the rest marched off into captivity. Despite rumors of a German-American alliance, the soldiers faced an ominous future. The last Wehrmacht order praised the army group in Courland for enduring months of Soviet attacks. And extremely brutal months. The resilience these German soldiers had is something we should all adopt into our lives. The fighting on the Courland front lasted from October 1944 until the end of the war, so there are different dates given for the 6 battles. I think that brings us to the end of our video of the Courland Pocket disaster. We should give our respects to the soldiers that held out for months with every odd against them and fought hard and bravely. Anyway, thank you so much for the support on here and over on Instagram. Also, our Patreon is linked below as well as our Instagram. We will see you guys soon.